Hi everyone, Shelley here. Wow, I just finished reviewing this episode of Canter Therapy podcast. We welcome back Dr. Chris Mortensen from Poseidon Animal Health for what turned out to be like a seriously fascinating conversation about mares, stress, hormones, fertility, gut health, and the incredible interconnectedness of the horse's body. Now, this episode starts with reproduction research, but honestly, it becomes much bigger than that. Dr. Chris shares some of the groundbreaking research of his own PhD, where he found that stress and exercise could dramatically reduce fertility in mares, disrupt hormone cycles, alter blood flow to the reproductive tract, and affect embryo quality. But what makes this conversation so compelling is how quickly you realize this isn't just about breeding horses. This is about stress and what stress does to the entire horse, and especially mares, who can get a bad reputation for being difficult with their behaviour. Well, there might be a reason why for that, and this podcast really highlights it. So we explore the links between stress, hormones, gut health, behaviour, inflammation, metabolic issues, and even hoof health. And then, right near the end of the episode, Dr. Chris potentially solves one of our great mysteries that Kat and I have been searching for years, which is the fascinating connection between soil health of equestrian properties, stress plants, gut microbiome, metabolic disease, and laminitis. Honestly, it completely broadens the way that we think about horse health and management. So whether you own mares, breed horses, compete horses, or just want to better understand the impact of stress on the horse's body, I think you're going to get so much out of this conversation. A big thank you to Dr. Chris and Poseidon Animal Health for once again supporting the podcast and so generously sharing his knowledge and experience with us. We'd also like to remind everyone that Canter Therapy podcast is independently supported by Kat and myself. So if you enjoy the podcast and would like to support us, please do. Please considering supporting our courses, workshops, clinics, or purchasing some of the really great Canter Therapy podcast merchandise. You can find out more about how to support us through our individual websites or cantertherapy.com.au. Okay, I'll let you get stuck into the podcast. Enjoy.
Good evening, Kat.
Good evening, Shelley. How are you this afternoon, evening?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm very excited because we got Dr. Chris Mortensen back on the podcast after our interview looking at gut health and all things, which was a very popular podcast. It's really been, it's had a lot of listens and a lot of feedback, which is very cool. But I got you back, Chris. Anyways, first of all, before I get into that, getting too excited, I should say good evening.
Yeah, good evening. Good evening across the ditch. It's great to be back.
Excellent, because I'm very excited. So I'm so excited to get you back because I really want to address this issue. There's some things that I'm very keen to dive into to understand more, and one is mares, okay,
Yes.
with mares and the impact of stress and chronic stress. Now, you are the guy to speak to because you've actually done a lot of research into this area. So I'm just going to ask you just very generally, and then we can deep dive into it because you've sent me some really interesting papers. My mind is blown. This is a very important podcast for everyone that owns a mare to listen to. Anyway, Chris, can you tell us about the impact of stress on mares and their hormones?
Oh, that's where I made my mark in research when I was a grad student. And stress definitely impacts reproduction. I mean, stress impacts us in so many different ways. But in the last time we met and discussed stress, what happens is that cortisol dump shunts blood away from the reproductive tract. We know that because the last thing a horse wants to do in a stressful situation is breed or try to have a foal, because that mare is not going to be as successful. She's in fight, flight. She's in survival mode. Her body's telling her, okay, you need to divert energy and all these resources to your muscles, to your respiratory tract, to your brain to survive. So in acute and chronic stress, acute is very short term. That's where I did a lot of my research, was looking at the effects of, chronic/acute, and chronic stress long over time. So we do know now, because this started in 2003 when I started my PhD at Texas A&M, that stress I'll just get to the chase. In my research, I found, especially in heat stress, exercise-induced heat stress, I cut mare's fertility in half, 50%.
Wow.
Yeah.
And it was
Wow.
drastic. It was really drastic. And when I presented that data, it made a lot of waves. Funny story, I was in Kirkcaldy, the Netherlands, at the International Symposium in Equine Reproduction. I was finishing my PhD, and Twink Allen, who I've greatly respected, he passed away a few years ago, but he is like one of the godfathers or godmothers of equine reproduction. And I presented my data, and he stood up and he said, "Young man, that is a beautiful paper. Well done." And people have told me since, like, "Wow, you've had Twink Allen like give you a compliment. That's rare." So yeah, it's interesting. We can dive into the weeds, why the project came about, but I did some follow-on research when I was a professor at Clemson and a little bit at the University of Florida. But yeah, stress definitely has negative impacts on reproduction, 100%.
Yeah. And I think also, so diving into it, because it impacts reproduction, it means it impacts hormones. And hormones, especially estrogen, has this wide-ranging effect on the body.
Yeah.
So not only do you have the stress and the chronic stress having an impact, you then got this other thing down the track of actually messing around with hormone imbalance. Now, any poor lady that is going through perimenopause knows what this impacts. So you just got this double whammy. So, I'm on this bit of a crusade because mares always cop a lot of negativity. Like they get called, they're just, they're just a really bitchy mare, or they're just a bit of a piece of work, or like, oh God, I prefer geldings and stuff like that. And I think they're just misunderstood. So anyway, I'll hand it over to Kat. What question do you have for Chris, Kat?
No, I find it really interesting when we come across this topic. I have sat in on a lot of lectures talking about the impact of like laminitis and pain and how that affects brood mares and their reproduction. But I hadn't thought about the fact that when we have acute and chronic stress, that it's going to affect their hormones, which is going to have an effect on training and riding them as well. So all of that is going to have an impact. And for me as a farrier, I can then like connect the dots, and I'm like, okay, well, if we've got pain in the feet, that's going to have an impact on hormones, which is going to have an impact on their temperament for riding and all that sort of stuff too.
Just compounded on compounded on compound stress.
Yeah.
Anyway, Chris, I would like to hear some of the background of how your research came about. I think that would be super interesting.
Yeah, the hormones came later because it was an evaluation of, does stress impact reproduction? That was the first big question, and I'll try to make this story as short as I can. When I arrived at Texas A&M from California, I just finished my master's in equine nutrition, and with Dr. Vogelsang, and I told her, I said, I really am interested in reproductive technologies. I want to round myself out. I felt I had a good grasp on horse nutrition, so I really wanted to get into horse reproductive physiology, and then looking at some of these reproductive technologies. Cloning was getting really big, and like I mentioned before, I was able to work with some spectacular reproductive physiologists. We were cloning some of the first. So she said, "Well, Chris, I have the perfect project for you." Her husband, Stephen Vogelsang, managed, I think it was one of the largest embryo transfer facilities in Weatherford, Texas. Pretty famous ranch there, and he was doing hundreds and hundreds of embryo transfers every year.
Wow.
Talking to Martha, he said, Martha, in the heat of late spring and summer in Texas, it's just really hot, like it's going on right now in Australia as we record this. I think 35 degrees Celsius was an average, getting up to 38 degrees Celsius. I'm trying to think from Fahrenheit to Celsius, but really humid, sticky hot, just miserable conditions. And he said, I am having trouble getting embryos from these mares every time this point in the year. My embryo collection rate goes way down, and then the embryos I get are really poor quality. There's something there. You need to investigate this. So here I am, brand new PhD student, hungry to do this. And she said, Chris, here's the project idea. We couldn't put mares in a chamber that was just heat. We didn't have that facility. We didn't think it was ethical, but we knew that we could exercise them in the heat of the day, not for very long. This was only 30 minutes. It was a long trot. We got them cantering a little bit, but just for 30 minutes, spike their body temperatures, and then breed them and collect embryos. So that's why I say exercise-induced heat stress. We cut their fertility in half.
Oh,
So
wow.
for 2 years, I bred these mares. I did embryo collections, and I sent you my first paper. That's my second most cited research article. My first one has to do with teaching, but the second one was this one because it made such a splash. And we got them up on average. Body temperatures were roughly close to 40 degrees Celsius. So within that 30 minutes, and horses we know do get hot. We watched them, we monitored them carefully. We didn't get in the danger zone, but we're careful, and mares we had to help cool down and everything after that. But we did spike their body temperatures, and then we bred them on day 7, breeding them until they ovulated, and then on day 7 I went and did an embryo collection. Did this for 2 years. The mares were switched. So at certain points they were non-exercise cycles. Other times that they were exercise, we flip-flopped them all, so everything was balanced over the 2 years. And in essence, like I told you, I had a 63% recovery rate, which is respectable in non-exercise mares, but then that dropped to 34% in exercise mares.
Wow. Yeah.
Then what was striking was, of my non-exercise mares, 75% were grade 1 embryos. That's why I sent you the pictures, because they're really pretty.
Mhm.
A day 7 horse embryo, it's a beautiful collection of cells. You see it clearly in the microscope. You can't see it with the naked eye, stereo microscope. And it's in an early blastocyst stage, so you have to train your eye to find it. But then you find it, and you have this beautiful, perfect embryo, and you're like, oh, that's a little baby horse. That's eventually going to be a horse. And generally, you would transfer those into a recipient mare, and then you have a baby in 11 months. In the exercise horses, I only had a 36% grade 1 recovery rate. So not only was I getting fewer embryos, 34%, most of those, close to 75%, were grade 2 or lower. So some of them were just dead. The insult, the temperature rise in the uterus, maybe hormones, was causing those embryos to die.
Yeah, wow.
And they weren't viable. So that a lot of them, you wouldn't be able to transfer those and get a pregnancy out of it. So that was my PhD work. I did some in vitro work where we heated the oocyte, which is the egg, pre-fertilization, and wanted to look at effects downstream. Pretty resilient, actually. So women that are hot or exercise, those oocytes are pretty well protected, which makes sense. If
Yeah.
they were getting harmed, the chances of any mammal, being successful would go way down. So the oocytes are pretty good, but late stage maturation, so right before they ovulate, so they grow in the ovary of the female horse and the mare. Right before ovulation, it's in the final stages of maturation. She ovulates it, and then once it's fertilized, it finishes and becomes an early embryo. Late stage maturation, we did see a decrease. So as she's getting ready to ovulate, those oocytes can be damaged, is what it told us.
Yeah. Wow.
So that was my PhD work, and we wrote that all up. I graduated, and then I could go on. I went off to Clemson, but that's more of the hormone work. And then we exercised mares in less stringent conditions. It wasn't quite as hot,
Yeah.
and it wasn't in the heat of the day, but we still had a dramatic decrease.
Yeah, that was amazing. Can you run us through what was super interesting is like what it actually did to them, like, how it increased blood flow in certain areas and decreased in others. That's what I found super interesting.
Yeah. So this is where now you take the biology, right? So we know there's a decrease, and that really in performance mares, a lot of them compete through the breeding season, and then they'll go and donate embryos. And so really why they stick to their competition and training schedules, they are really drastically reducing their chances of producing quality embryos. I did get some pushback in meeting years later where a couple of vets from Europe were very upset with my research because I was hurting their business, because you can't tell these horse owners that they're not going to get embryos because they're losing business. And I said, look, this is what the data is showing. So
sorry to interrupt there. So sorry to interrupt there, but it's like that's embryo transfer is very common when you've got a really good competition mare and you want to take those embryos out, but that mare's been worked.
Yes.
And under stress.
That's the whole point.
So that's why they're not necessarily happy with your research.
Yes, because it's hurting their business, because people are like, why am I spending thousands of dollars to breed this mare to top quality stallions, and my chances of getting an embryo are abysmal.
Yeah, wow.
So that's where the pushback came. I kind of figured that out later. I was taken back at first because everybody was like, this research is incredible. So anyways, what's the physiology? That was my next step. And I wanted other people to repeat this because this was my lab, and I wanted other independent labs to kind of corroborate what I found. And they have found similar tendencies. And even a lot of vets I talked to, they said, oh yeah, competition mares, poor embryo quality, heat of the summer, really tough to breed horses, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So the physiology. We looked at not only the gross physiology of the reproductive tract through ultrasound, thousands of hours of ultrasound, and then we looked at the hormones. So to get back to the hormones, there is a reason. So what's the physiological reason of women having trouble getting pregnant with erratic cycles and erratic hormones, or if they're exercising quite a bit? We know in women that can be a problem, especially in extreme athletes.
Yeah. And
going to the horse, we looked at LH and FSH. Now, we didn't look at estrogen because the assay wasn't validated. There was a reason we didn't look at estrogen, or we did do estrogen and we didn't see any differences. I'm trying to go back to that research. But what we did find, this was the most fascinating part of that. So during the mare's estrus cycle, she's pulsing FSH, and FSH pulses quite a bit, like boom, boom, boom,
and this is
boom,
follicle
boom.
stimulating hormone.
Yes. So we're making follicles. She has her 2 ovaries, and she's recruiting those early oocytes, just a few. She has thousands of them, probably 500,000 oocytes on both ovaries. But she's going to recruit, I'd say a dozen of them. And they start growing a little bit. They start getting some follicular fluid. Then she gets to 2 to 3 follicles as they grow. And then generally with the horse, you get one big one that grows. And then she ovulates that. Very rarely you'll get double ovulations. But what that's caused by is FSH. So it's pulsing, boom, 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 every day. Then as the follicle gets bigger, you start getting a little bit of estrogen. That's feeding back to the brain, and the brain, through the hypothalamic pituitary axis, starts stimulating some LH, luteinizing hormone.
Yeah.
That is the very important hormone that causes ovulation. So LH pulses, but it builds up. It's kind of like boom, 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 and then ovulation.
Yeah.
As soon as she ovulates at the peak, that LH peak, the estrogen feedback goes away, LH goes down normally. Now, what we found with exercise. So the hypothalamic pituitary axis is also the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which cortico-releasing hormone, when you're stressed, that's released And then that tells the body, okay, we're in a fight flight. We're mobilizing all of our energy reserves. We're shutting down digestion. We're shutting down reproduction. We're powering up the muscles, powering up the brain. Let's get going. So through that process, what we found when we exercise horses, and again, they were not nearly as hot. They were getting to like 38 degrees Celsius, not 40.
Yeah.
But 30 minutes, long trot, a little bit of canter, get their heart rates up. We blunted LH. And LH,
wow.
LH was blunted, and it took a lot longer for the mare to ovulate. So
Okay.
her cycle, in this study that we did, her estrus cycle, non-exercise, was 23 days. So from ovulation to ovulation, exercise mares, that went to 30 days.
Yeah,
So,
okay, that's a
so we
disruption.
we totally disrupted her estrus cycle. So
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's really fascinating because that's that gets screws up a lot. And I suppose then you got
Yeah.
other factors that are triggering, like seasonal triggers and all these other things that just get disrupted. That's really fascinating. Yeah. Now, it was another bit of the paper that was so interesting about how, I don't know if we're up to discussing this yet,
No.
but when you looked at the hormones at the different stages of the cycle and the different impacts of cortisol levels and things like that you found by by exercising them after estrus and before and all these types of things. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, so we did a couple studies, a few studies at Clemson. That was Dr. Dale Kelly. He's a DVM PhD, professor at Oklahoma State now. That was his master's work, was the hormones. Then Jason Anton, he was a DVM. He actually practiced in Australia for quite a while, but he's now back in Oklahoma practicing medicine. His study for his master's degree before he went to vet school was exercising pregnant mares. So we did day 16 because that's when we can scan them and go, okay, yeah, there's definitely a pregnancy established. Everything looks good. Then we'll exercise this group. And then we had the non-exercise group up to day 80. Because about day 80, the conceptus like goes over the cliff of her hip. So it drops way down the abdomen and you can't really see it anymore. And then there was no way to scan. We were messing with transabdominal, I mean, just to look at thickness of placenta and stuff. But in that study, what was interesting is progesterone early on was blunted. So less progesterone, which is very important to maintain pregnancy. Didn't have any negative effects. Foals went on, they were fine, healthy, all that. But I found that quite interesting.
So did it have an effect on whether they kept the pregnancy or lost the pregnancy?
No, but we didn't have a large cohort. It was
okay.
8 mares exercise, 8 not. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, we didn't have a huge cohort, but no problem there. And again, that would make sense in the wild. If a horse is getting chased once a day for a good while, she's typically not going to abort the baby. So once pregnancy is established, things are pretty good. Now, in a chronic stress where it's not just once a day, but all day, yeah, there's probably a chance that her body would shut down and maybe abort. So that was the second project I did. Then the third project I did was a partial exercise. And this was Rachel's study. This is where the blood flow came in. And I wanted you to see those.
Amazing.
Yeah, the blood flow around the follicle or the perfusion. So our hypothesis was, okay, we think we're doing insults to the embryo. That, we know the hormones are kind of fluctuating, but if exercise really was harming that early embryo, and let's say it never descends down into the uterus, and we never, so we'll never have a chance to recover it, because I started to have to break down at what stage was the most sensitive to stress. And so the project design was a control group, so no exercise being bred, embryos being collected, a partial exercise group where we exercised them up to the day of ovulation, then gave them a break until day 7 of the embryo collection, and then a full exercise group all the way through. And let me see, I can pull her table up. Oh, I did study the paper. It's the follicular perfusion one.
Yeah.
So it didn't matter. Partial exercise and exercise still had about a 20% reduction
Yeah.
in fertility. So again, not in the heat of the day like Texas, but Rachel, her embryo recovery rate on control was 67%. So she beat me, and she was very proud of that because I only had 63% in Texas. And then she had like 41% and 41% off the top of my head of exercise and
Wow.
non-exercise. But embryo quality, again, was like a 50-50. So you were getting more poor quality embryos with exercise. So again, that tells me, okay, maybe it is the hormones, the LH surge, which is so critical. But I left Clemson, so I didn't have a chance to answer that. I went off to the University of Florida to do research down there. So those three studies together at Clemson showed that this phenomenon of stress is definitely impacting mare. So Kat, when you talk about a laminitic mare or a really ouchy mare, to me, stress is stress is stress. It's
doesn't matter what type of stress, it's still the same impact on the body.
Pathways. Yeah, you're still going down the similar pathways. Now, obviously, heat is an additional factor because thermoregulation can play a part. But when we talk about the hormones and we talk about reproduction's always been, since I've studied it, a series of carefully orchestrated events to get a successful pregnancy.
Yeah.
If it wasn't, there would probably be 50 billion people on the planet because, we'd be reproducing so quickly. But we know, especially for some people, getting pregnant or whatever can be difficult, just like with our horses. It's like every time we put them in the breeding shed, we want to get them caught in the first cycle, but generally we don't. It's the second or third. Hopefully we get them. And I've had mares where it took 5 or 6 cycles and the owners were about to give up.
Yeah.
So you have these carefully orchestrated events happening to produce an embryo, allow it to get into the uterus, then get established up near the bifurcation and the horn, and then grow, and then get the endometrial cups formed. And everything goes right there. And then she carries it for 11 months. I mean, that's a long time. Yeah. So when we disrupt it with stress, we're drastically reducing our chances of a successful pregnancy.
Yeah. No, so what kind of practical outcomes, what was from your research and findings, were you able to make any changes to practice or whatever that was able to increase or avoid particular times, or just really identify that reducing stress in these reproduction horses was a priority?
For me, it was for performance mares. If you're going to train with them, train them early morning, depending on where you live.
Yeah.
Like if I'm in Victoria today, I'm not riding my horse. It's baking. It's just that the heat's so unbearable, even at early in the morning. You've got to be very careful with your training schedule, your competition schedule. My advice is give them a break. If you're really trying to get some embryos from these mares during the part of the breeding season where she's cycling normally, and you want to give yourself the best chance, you take a break. Keep them in light work.
How long?
Well, if you're looking at 23 days from ovulation to ovulation, and you want to get a couple embryos, and it depends on who your technician is and their recovery rates. Because if you're looking, 65% is a good recovery rate, and some of the best in the world say they can get 75, 80%, which, Stephen Vogelsang and Dr. Katrin Henriks, who I trained with, they're that good. They've done thousands of these. So they probably have rates like that. But if you're looking at like a 65% recovery rate and then a transfer rate, a 75% pregnancy establishment rate, so you're looking at 40 to 50% at every cycle of getting a pregnancy. So at least if you do it twice, you'll get at least one full. If you want to do it 4 times, that's a couple months off of, 3 months off of training, roughly. No, we're short. Well, sorry. I should
what you're
back that
saying
up.
is, sorry.
We do short. Yeah.
Egg, you're wanting that whole cycle to be without exercise as much as possible.
Yeah, but we do short cycle them, by the way, too. So at day 7, we'll give them a shot of luteolase because we don't want them to stay pregnant. And in case you miss the embryo, so those cycles are shorter. So you could push them, 3-4 cycles and then get them back into competition, get them back in a full training schedule. But that would be my best advice if you want to maximize your chances of getting successful pregnancy. Now, there's so many different factors. The other is we don't want to insult her uterus too much, because the way these embryo collections go is we stick a balloon catheter through her cervix, blow that up, we infuse her with 500 milliliters is what I use. Some people use a liter of the flush solution. Then we go in, and if you're really good, this is what Dr. Hendricks taught me, was to massage that up both horns so you can get the embryo, and then we drain it through tubing into a collection dish that has a 90 micron filter, I think is the what it is, and it's that way the embryo doesn't get flushed out. And then you take that to the lab and you do that 3-4
Under the
times.
microscope. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you look for it and you find it and you're like, yes, I found it. And then you get it in the
Yeah.
incubator to protect it in your holding media. But when we do that, we're insulting her uterus, because the uterus is really like, a protected place, and we don't want too many microorganisms in there, or we can get uterine infections, and then that's puts the mare at risk. So the general feeling was we could do about 4 a year to be safe. And then you allow her to cycle normally, she'll clean up and be ready for the next year.
Yeah.
Real quick, Argentina, researchers down there with polo ponies, because, they're worth a ton of money. They pushed a mare. I think they got a dozen embryos. I think upwards. This was 20 years ago. They got up to like 16 embryos from one mare. I mean, they pushed her, and I just thought, wow, that uterus was trashed. Like that's really putting a mare at risk. I mean, 4 to 6 max times a year, but that's it. That's it. You don't want to overdo it with them. Yeah.
Yeah. Good. So that's really important stuff if people are interested in like getting in.
I'm super interested.
Yeah, Kat's actually bred from a good mare. Kat did embryo transfer and stuff like that. So it's really good information, because it's getting more prevalent, these days and age, of what people are actually doing. They're not putting their mare in foal, they're doing embryo transfer and putting it in a recipient mare. So that's really good to know, because it's really expensive.
It is, and you want it to go as well as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my next question, Chris, is about those mares that are not reproduction horses. They're actually just, they're just people's lovely horse that they ride, or they might be those competition horses. And just what could be the potential impact on these horses when it comes to the impact of stress on their hormone levels and ramifications of that. So you got any thoughts about those horses then? So they're not reproduction, they're just horses that are just being ridden. So their behavior and injuries and all things like that become important.
Yeah, it is interesting, because if they have erratic cycles, does that lead to erratic behavior? It's not something I really measured or looked at, but it is an interesting concept, because you're lengthening the time that estrogen is there in high levels. Estrogen has a purpose. She is being told to breed. Her brain and her body is saying, hey, it's this time of year, I need to be carrying a baby, and it's not her fault. It is nature, and you have to love and respect her for it, because if it wasn't for her doing her job, we wouldn't have the horses that we have today, the 50 million. So when it comes to stress, we can be causing some erratic cycles or lengthening of that ovulatory interval. Like I talked about LH, they went from 23 days to 30 days. So over that period, she's having more days of estrogen dominance, which again is telling her, I don't care about jumps. I don't care about cantering. I just need to breathe, because that's what my hormones are telling me. And you really have to feel for her. Yeah.
When that gets denied. Yeah.
Yeah. So then her behavior is being blunted, and she doesn't understand why. And so I've worked with mares and stallions my whole career, and I love them. I love my mares. Yeah, geldings are great. They're fun to ride. They're easy, but I've been around so many mares. I've helped deliver so many foals, and I just I can't think of another animal that I love more than a female horse and what she does.
Yeah.
And you watch her behavior, like especially after foaling, and how she bonds with the foal right away, and how protective she is of it and nurturing. And yeah, they're just phenomenal animals. They're just phenomenal.
Yeah. Yeah, I just think about the disruption of the cycle and all the impacts that has on so many systems. Just estrogen alone impacts, I think it's over 700 things that it's involved in, reactions and stuff within the body of modulating things and things like that. And I think of the impact that can have on ligaments and tendons and inflammation in the body. So you got all
Yep.
that going
Yep.
on. And then, and not only that, and it does have an impact on behavior. So does progesterone, which also will be stuffed up as well. And then, of course, you've got the stress doing all the other things. So you've got the gut that's been targeted,
Yeah.
the gut that then's going to impact the feet because of the nutrients all get messed up. So it really is a matter of really taking note of all sources of stress and trying to target them to reduce the impact of those. So it's a real holistic management of it. So I'll just give you a case, right? I've got a case. I've got a good friend. She's a really good trainer, and she's got a lovely little mare, lovely little quarter horse mare. But every like spring, summer, that time period, she cannot work her. She turns into an absolute, really gets uncomfortable and really gets really reactive and flighty. Anyway, she's had to do a whole lot to actually manage us through. And she's, trying to, so first of all, she's had to shoe her, right? Put shoes on to protect the feet because they were getting impacted. Digestive EQ from Poseidon's Digestive EQ. She had the mare on other forms of the other brands of gut support, but she's gone on to digestive EQ, and that's made a big difference. And she's also found out she's also has like one of those lumen lights, those lights to
Yep.
that you put on. What are they called, Kat? those things called? That blue light that helps them.
Yeah. I can't remember off the top of my head. Oh my goodness.
Anyway, it's one of those things that she wears.
It'll come to me in a minute.
To try to help with the triggering of the seasonal things. Yeah, so she's had to do, and also progesterone. She's on the Regimate, and that's all been able to help her. But also she's found that she just gives her some time off as well during that period, just to try to manage her through it. But it was interesting from what you've just told us then that that's all making sense.
Yeah. It's all compounded, and just really quick, I think this is the most important part of the podcast for anybody listening, because this is a soapbox I've stood on since I started teaching 20 something years ago. Regimate, that is synthetic progesterone. So for any women listening to this podcast, you don't touch it, don't even look at it, and I don't make too much of a jest of it, but have one of your male colleagues or partners or barn mates feed that to your mares if you can. If you are the one scooping and feeding that, wear gloves. Be very careful. That is very toxic to women, and women have gone into early menopause because of that product. That's why there's warnings on it. Because in a lot of my horse classes, it was like, 70% young women. And I'm like, look, every time we talk to repro, I'd flash it up and say, this is the most important part of the semester, because that's your own personal health. So remember that. But what that's doing is suppressing estrogen. So even though her body's telling her to breed, we're suppressing some of that estrogen, which we think is causing, which is linked to reproductive behavior, but is causing some of that so mares can try to stay focused in training or competition. But just very important not to not mess with it.
Yeah.
And, I know plenty of women give it. I always say that,
Yeah.
like,
Don't
just so
get
people,
lazy.
I was
Don't get
talking to a
lazy.
friend
Drink it.
yesterday and she said that she accidentally spilt it on herself and she was like, I didn't get my period for over 8 months.
yeah,
Which
it's
is
that toxic. It's that powerful of a
Yeah.
progesterone.
Wowza.
So
Yeah.
this is maybe off topic, but given that most of our pills that we have for contraception in humans are progesterone, is it doing the same thing in our horses? It's just at a higher dose and that's why it affects us so much?
Yes, it suppresses their estrous cycle, right? And those behaviors and estrogen. So yeah, definitely. That it's very, very similar. It doesn't quite, we use it to regulate their cycles too. If we're trying to get them in season, we'll give them that for a few days, then give them shots of luteolise to kickstart their cycle early in the season. And pregnancy, mares that might lose pregnancy early on, we might give some progesterone if needed. Yeah.
Is that similar to PG when we inject PG?
Prostaglandins.
Yeah.
So no, that's luteolise. So that's
Yeah.
getting rid of your. It is similar in the sense that you have this corpus luteum producing the progesterone.
Yeah.
So we give them luteolise or prostaglandins to get rid of that, so they will
Yeah.
recycle quicker. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I was gonna say it's all part of like. There's so much that goes into breeding horses, especially when you're doing embryo transfers, and we have all these different medications and drugs we can use, and different techniques and everything. So that's what my PhD was about, learning all of this.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
It also points out because like a lot of owners put their horse on Regimate hoping that it will fix their behavior, and some it will help, but some it doesn't. And I think what you've just pointed out, because it depends what's actually disrupting the cycle, and it may or may not be positively impacted by giving more progesterone. There could be other things going on there. So that's really good. No, that was really interesting. Now, could there be any, this is an extrapolation or hypothetical. So I noticed within the research that there were certain times that you tested, like certain days, the period of the cycle, and having different kind of stress responses that you were measuring. So from that, could you go, like, could good advice be for your mare, just for your regular mare, one that might not be a reproduction or mare that you want to breed with, just one you care about stressing it, right? Is that maybe give it some days off leading up to cycling and for a couple of days after.
Yes, I mean it's. I mean, when the acute stress response, I mean, it's going to spike, and then you'll have some disruption, and then there's a recovery period. So if, like, we talk about the gut is everything. I'm glad you mentioned that one horse. Like, you fix the gut, that's step one with a lot of horses with behavioral issues, because I'm sitting here thinking of all the precursors that we need for hormones are the nutrients. So we need to make sure we're getting all the proper nutrients to get the precursors so the horse can actually make the proper hormones. So that's why gut health is so funny. I listen to all these podcasts on humans because I'm really into it now. Like, I'm like, okay, I need this in my diet now, and these things and these fibers, and it's flavonoids and polyphenols, all this stuff. It's really changed my whole outlook on myself. But yeah, we look at their diet, and that's some of the work I did in Florida, was impacts of diet on reproduction, because there's definitely a correlation there. Then we look at training schedules and lining it up with the cycle. So early in the season, the mare is going to be erratic. You talked about lights. Horses are long day breeders. Melatonin suppresses the estrous cycle and their cyclicity. So in winter, high spikes in melatonin overnight, that keeps the reproductive, the mare not cycling, right? So she doesn't cycle over winter. Fall, winter, early spring, those days are really short. But long days, so once the sun's out and we have these long days, that melatonin lock is gone and she starts cycling. Those first couple cycles are going to be erratic coming into season, but if we put them under lights early, we get through that
erratic period earlier.
erratic period earlier, because we're trying to get these horses born as close to the birth year as possible, right?
Yeah.
So, when they're older in age group competition, they're older than their peers. So once we get through that erratic period and they're cycling normally, if they're in training or if you're in competition and you identify talking to your breeder who you're working with, your veterinarian or whatnot, and say, okay, we know she's cycling normally now. We looked at her estrus behavior. She probably ovulated on this day. She'll be back in heat in about 3 weeks. So if I was going to breed that mare on that cycle, I would not exercise her at all. If we said, okay, we'll start on the next cycle, because I think that's getting to your question.
Yeah.
I would wait probably and give her a few days of adjustment to calm down everything with the hormones, let her ovulate. Normally that exercise probably isn't helping that erratic cycle. So, I just give them a break. I know that's easy to say, especially when you have competition schedule, depends on your discipline. But if you give her a cycle off, let her get adjusted, and then that next cycle, that's probably going to be your best fertile cycle. The other thing we haven't talked about yet, because this was the other part of my research that I just found so fascinating, was blood flow to the ovary. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Doppler ultrasounds, and they're pretty common now. I mean, my wife, we have a 14-month-old now, and when she'd go in and the ultrasound tech, and I'm like, oh, it's a Doppler, show me all this stuff. And we're looking at blood flow, to the baby. It was a new technology 20 years ago, emerging technology. And not that it was this huge, giant computer on a trolley. It was a laptop, right? So we had the travel Dopplers. So what we did is we went and we could look at the perfusion of blood around a follicle. So again, like early on, she recruits the follicles. She gets 2 to 3 larger follicles. One would become dominant. And with the Doppler, well, what happens physiologically is microvascular development around that follicle. So a bunch of blood vessels are growing to produce or feed the nutrients to that follicle, and then get the hormones, the feedback with estrogen.
Yeah.
So we want to see good perfusion of blood all around the follicle. Our exercise horses, we had drastically reduced perfusion, and then we correlated the perfusion with an embryo. So if we had greater than close to 55% perfusion, so most of the follicle, or over half the follicle, there was blood flow we could detect, that would usually equal an embryo. When it was 33% or lower, we typically did not get an embryo. So there was less perfusion, less blood flow, less nutrients to that follicle, less hormone feedback. So with our exercise horses, we were impacting blood flow, which we know, again, blood's being blunted to elsewhere. So the blood flow, and there's other indices we measured with the arteries and stuff leading down to the ovary, but we took away the blood from the reproductive tract. So if I told you, don't, go till, the day of ovulation, stop exercising to give yourself a better chance of getting an embryo, that's disingenuous, because chances are that was a poor follicle. So either that oocyte's not fully matured, or the oocyte could be dead for all we know, or it's non-viable. So you want them to have rest during the whole cycle up until embryo collection to give yourself the best chance. We don't want to disrupt those carefully timed events.
Yeah, interesting.
I hope that makes sense.
absolutely.
I think this understanding that stress, and even the stress that you chose that was easiest to employ was exercise. But it's actually very significant, because when you're looking at the mare that you want to do an embryo transplant on, you're normally doing it because you got it in work and you want to keep it in work. And it's very expensive. So this is really practical, good information. And we can also extrapolate to general stress and the effect on mares and their cycles and their hormones and everything that might not be reproduction mares. So I think that's important. Your paper that you sent, and I will put the references to your papers in the show links so people can go and look at this really fascinating research for themselves. But the other thing you picked up was also the long-term impact. So even though you got a better hormone profile, you still had this carry-on effect. It was like the body had adapted and you were still getting these poor follicles, even though the horse had kind of habituated to the stress.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
had this long-term effect. So you just couldn't look at the hormone profile. The body had obviously adapted and going, well, we don't really use that anymore, so we won't put much effort into. I don't know if that's what the body would say, but it was so interesting about the long-term impacts of stress on the mare's reproductive tract and hormones.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. These were mares that were fit. They went through a adaptation. They adapted to the exercise over time. We trained them up. It wasn't just day one, okay, get in there and exercise. And, you know, like if I had to go run a marathon today, I'd die, you know, I'd fall over dead. It's like, you know, but a mare, you know, these animals are very athletic. It was about a month we trained them in the exerciser because we didn't want them to be stressed in there too, in the sense that they were going to hurt themselves or hurt the handlers. So they got used to the exercise. Then we started breeding them because it was, you know, trying to punch holes in my PhD dissertation, because that's what a good scientist does. It's like, okay, is this phenomenon real? I want people to tear it apart and say, well, this was true, this wasn't true, or wow, you just, for some reason that year in Texas, it just was a bad year to breed mares. But no, people have gone on and repeated some of this. And we do see it in women particularly, where they have reproductive failure and they're high performance athletes or, you know, endurance athletes, triathletes, all of them. Oftentimes they have difficulty getting pregnant. And you know, it is funny. I used to always tell my class, and there was a picture in the newspaper many years ago of a very heavily pregnant woman doing strength training, and I was appalled. I was like, that poor baby, you know, please don't. The general advice was, if you're a woman, just so women out there aren't freaking out, if you are an athlete and you are exercising, when you do get pregnant, they always say, you know, go to low to moderate impact. So, but don't stop exercising because your body's used to it, you know, and that wouldn't be good. But it is good to exercise while you're pregnant, but it's low to moderate impact. Don't go out there and try to run a marathon pregnant, because you're not doing yourself any favors and that baby. So and that's a whole nother discussion about,
and that's going to epigenetics and all the rest of it.
Epigenetics, yes. The Dutch cohort is the most fascinating research I've ever come across.
No, I do find stress research very interesting. Actually, I remember I was listening to a bit of a little podcast, and it was actually looking at women again and reproduction and stress, and saying how, like, looking at different cultures, and just say some other cultures that, you know, some of the ones that still in hunter-gatherer type cultures, that those women are continuously having babies. So they actually don't actually have a period often. Yet women in the Western world have a lot of periods, and all the kind of impact, like endometriosis, just say endometriosis and all this kind of thing, is kind of unheard of in those, you know, in those particular communities. So it actually points to the fact that we're, you know, the female body is designed to, you know, get pregnant a lot, and impacts of when that doesn't happen. And it was really fascinating. So
stress. I mean, women, women
Yeah.
are stressed to high heaven today. Diet, it goes back to diet. And, you know, I mean, I've mentored a lot of young women. Many have gone on to get their PhDs, DVMs. They are brilliant scientists, and it's just the stress women are under today in the Western world, from Australia, stretching all the way to Europe and in between, is incredible. It's incredible that the amount of stress that women are placed under. and the demands of you. So like I said, I have a baby and my wife, I let me help you when I can. I change plenty of nappies and, I wake up with him in the morning and try to give her a break. And, because I realize there's just so much stress today. And you watch social media and the news and all of this junk, and it's no wonder. It's no wonder.
Yeah, there's a lot of stress. So we can really think about mares.
Yes, they are too. They're stressed. They are stressed.
Now, if I can be cheeky, I would like to bring us back to our conversation last time about the gut, because I did ask you a question about that I've been hunting. I've been hunting this. It's not really a myth. I mean, it's not really a myth because I absolutely trust Imogen's story. The story, I'll just reiterate it very quickly. I met a wonderful lady called Imogen who had a problem with her horses on her farm, which were suffering from being overweight and laminitic. And she was just fighting all the time. And she mentioned it to her dad, who was a really good farmer. And he just said, "Oh, fix that." So we went off and treated the paddock, and we don't really know what it did. Then suddenly horses lost weight. Anyway, Imogen has an intake, or what was in the soil, just by improving all that, and maybe what people out there are suffering from when they suffer so much from metabolic disease is that it's because we're on horse paddocks and the properties are suffering from what horses do to paddocks. So anyway, I gave you this. It's like,
yes,
Chris,
it's homework.
Any idea what this could be? As was your homework.
It's homework.
I'm on your report.
No, yeah. So it's interesting because we have Metabolize. It's this incredible product. That's the one I'm screaming about the most. These flavonoids. So Kat, with like your ouchie laminitic horses, it's just the research, like I mentioned, polyphenols and flavonoids in human medicine is incredible. And so that's where like I said, I was talking earlier, I've listened to all these gut health podcasts for myself and, okay, what do I need to be eating more for this, that, and the other?
We're going to come back to that in a minute because I want more.
Yeah. So it's when I hear metabolic, I go to that, but then but then we go to the etiology of what caused that. So this is what the pathway I went down. I heard that story. And I mean, I immediately go to the soil, but then I thought, okay, why are these horses metabolic? What's going on? Why is there more sugar in the forage? The plants, it was so right in front of me. It took me for a while. And then afterwards I was like, oh, duh. And then I went some digging and I said, that was it. So probably those plants were so stressed because the soil was so poor. The soil was acidic, and those plants were storing more sugar in them. So those horses were eating lollipops every day.
Yeah, stress plants.
Yes, stressed plants. So they were getting a lot of sugar that caused sugar overload, which then we know is really detrimental to the hindgut. So hindgut acidosis, dysbiosis. So your microbiome's messed up. Your metabolic, your feet are ouchy. Old farmer comes out. He's like, I've seen this before. He knows it's the soil, and he probably sprayed lime or something like lime, like a calcium carbonate, that raised the acidity of the soil that allowed those plants to flourish. And then they would store less sugar because they use that sugar to grow every night. And the pasture came back. And it just, I was like, duh, soils. Now, when I was a equine specialist in South Carolina, I knew, obviously a lot about horses, and I handled all the horse stuff, but I had my forage expert right next to me and our soil scientist next to him. And, we were a team that would go and look at pastures and paddocks, and they would test the soil and, okay, you need these more nutrients. And then Dr. John Andre, he's still there now. He would go, okay, these are the plants that grow best in South Carolina in these types of soils, blah, blah, blah. So it took a team of experts to really tackle it. I went back to those days. I was like, duh, it's in the soil.
Yeah.
The soil is critical. And I think we might've mentioned this last time, but it's so critical to forage, because I know we have a lot of horses and paddocks here in New Zealand and Australia. The soils are beautiful, like in New Zealand, very rich, but they are deficient in certain nutrients for sure. There's not a soil on
Mhm.
earth that is perfect for horses. So that's why we always say forage first, then get a good vitamin mineral mix. Like we have Daily Balance, which is a really good one that covers all the gaps. So you have all the forage, then you cover all of their nutrients requirements for the day. Then we look for other things, energy. We have performance horses that, well, they're going to need more
Yeah.
energy. We know that. So how do we get that? Do we look at good oils? Like KER's got an excellent fish oil. That's the one I always recommend. I just always recommend it to people. I said, if you're looking for the best oil on the market, they're not paying me. It's just saying this. I know Dr. Joe Pagan who founded KER, but it's the omega profile is really good with fish oils. It's the best in the world. That's why I take fish oil tablets every day. And that's also something to consider, and blah, blah, blah. Anyways, I could go off on nutrition, but didn't mean to go down that rabbit hole. But I think he was smart enough. I see with the dairy cattle all around me. He went and sprayed the pasture probably with a lime or calcium carbonate that changed the acidity. Yes, raised the pH of that soil. Those plants said, "Thank you, Lord," and it just grew.
No, that's really cool. So everyone out there with your struggling with overweight, horses, laminitic, look at your soil, treat the soil, get the plant less stressed. Yeah.
Dr. Chris, can you tell me what podcasts you listen to regarding human nutrition?
So well, I can pull up my list right here. Let me see. I'm a big history nerd, so I do listen to history ones.
Same here.
The two that I really like is the Diary of the CEO. He's really big into health, right? And so the one that I listened to the other day, this one it was really long, but I had to drive up to Auckland and back, so it was a 2-hour trip. The Diary of the CEO, listen to that. It's 2 hours. He was really good. Leaky gut, talking about gut inflammation, all the stuff that, like at Poseidon, we research and we find the best things for our horses. It talks a lot about the gut microbiome. They're linking gut microbiome to mental disorders and everything. It was such a good podcast. Now the other one's a little woo-woo. It's Know Thyself: How Stress, Trauma, and Modern Life Break Your Gut. So that would be very pertinent to what we're talking about there. Dr. Will. And there was one that your gut is wiser than your mind. Science of Intuition, mood. Now, what was interesting about his data, which I found fascinating, in humans, twins, the gut microbiome is completely different. You would think the genetics would be the same. Yeah, Shelley, you're like, wow. I literally think you have identical twins, that their gut microbiome would be very, very similar, growing up in a similar household, similar conditions. No, completely different. Only about 20-something% of their gut was.
So is that their epigenetics is expressed slightly different between two?
Well, it could be whatever they're introducing, like what if they chew on that, pick up something they shouldn't and put it down, so they'll never get them, I suppose, never get two even twins that are going to be taking in exactly the same things. How fascinating.
Thing all the time. That was
cool.
That was an interesting factoid. And the other thing is 60% of our droppings are bacteria. I did know that.
Wow.
So, I've studied a lot of, I've been up close with a lot of horse manure. I've had it all over me, those thousands of hours scanning them. And I didn't realize a lot of that is just bacteria, because they're producing trillions of bacteria all the time.
Oh, that's fascinating. Wow.
Awesome.
I reckon that's the best place to finish up.
Thank you so much, Chris. That's so funny. That was amazing.
I think we're going to have to come up with another topic and have you back. But thank you so much for that. That was so revealing about the impact of stress on mares and the ramifications on breeding, but also just being a mare. And then thank you so much for solving the mystery and how actually simple it was.
I should, I mean, it's been years since I've had to deal with soils and testing and all that. I should have known that, but It is that
No,
critical, the
I
soil, yeah.
have asked that question. I've posed that story to many people, haven't we, Kat?
Yeah.
And they've all gone, oh, I'm not sure. It's interesting because it's obviously just, it's something so simple. So
Yeah.
it's not obvious, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Stress
thank
isn't
you
good
so
for
much for
us. It's not good for our horses, and it's not good for our plants. So
plants
there you go.
either. No. Well, thank you so much for joining us and, sharing your knowledge with us again. So thank you very much, and we'll say good evening. See
Yeah.
you, Chris.
Take care.